The house was quiet when Claire stepped inside, the kind of quiet that pressed against her ears and made her slow her steps. Outside, the evening rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and heavy. Inside, the lights were on, but no one came to greet her. She closed the door softly and stood still for a moment, listening. No television, no music, just silence. She walked down the hallway, her shoes in her hand, moving by habit more than thought. The house had been her world for years, yet lately it felt unfamiliar, like a place she was only visiting. Mark should have been home by now. Ethan usually was. As she passed Ethan's room, she noticed the door was not fully closed. A thin line of light spilled into the hallway. Claire slowed, not meaning to stop, but something about the quiet pulled her closer. Inside, Ethan sat on the floor with his back against the bed. His laptop was open in front of him. On the screen, a younger version of Ethan laughed, spoke loudly, and moved with careless energy. He looked happy in the video, full of confidence, full of noise. The real Ethan watched closely, his face still, his shoulders tight. He spoke the same lines as the boy on the screen, just a second behind. His voice was low, almost unsure, as if he was testing whether those words still belonged to him. Claire held her breath. She had seen Ethan grow up. She had seen scraped knees, school plays, late-night talks about dreams and fears. But she had never seen him like this, trying to step back into a version of himself that no longer existed. She felt like she was seeing something private, something fragile. She stepped away before the floor could creak, before he could notice her. Her heart beat faster than it should have. In the kitchen, she poured a glass of water. She didn't drink. Her thoughts stayed in the hallway in Ethan's room with that quiet sadness on his face. He wasn't just watching an old video. He was searching for something he had lost. Mark still hadn't come home. Claire checked the clock, then her phone. No messages. She told herself not to read into it. She had been doing that a lot lately, telling herself things were fine when they clearly weren't. When Mark finally arrived, it was late. He entered the house without noise, as if he didn't want to be noticed. Claire heard the door and walked into the living room. "You're late," she said. He nodded, loosening his tie. Long day. She watched him carefully. His eyes didn't stay on her long. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that came from work. Was the tiredness of someone carrying too many secrets. They ate dinner with polite words and long pauses. Mark spoke about meetings. Claire nodded at the right moments. Neither asked real questions. From down the hall, Ethan's door stayed closed. That night, Claire lay awake long after Mark had fallen asleep. She stared at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks in the paint. Her mind kept moving back and forth between two thoughts. Ethan replaying his past, and Mark avoiding the present. She felt caught between them. The next morning, Claire woke early. Sunlight filled the kitchen as she made coffee. Ethan came in quietly, his hair messy, his eyes tired. He sat at the table and rubbed his hands together as if warming himself. "Morning," Claire said. "Morning," he answered. They sat in silence for a moment, and Claire spoke, careful with her words. "I heard your guitar last night." Ethan looked up, surprised. "Oh yeah, I couldn't sleep." "You always played better when you couldn't sleep?" A small smile crossed his face, but it faded quickly. "I guess I'm trying to remember how to be good at things again." Claire's chest tightened. "You are good, Ethan. You always were." He shrugged, looking down at the table. "Sometimes it doesn't feel like it." Mark entered the kitchen then, already on his phone. He barely looked at either of them. Claire watched the way Ethan's shoulders stiffened, the way he went quiet again. After breakfast, Mark left quickly. He kissed Claire on the cheek, light and rushed. "I'll be late again," he said. Claire didn't answer right away. Shh. Listened to the door close behind him. Later that day, the house felt too big. Claire cleaned rooms that were already clean, moved things that didn't need moving. Her thoughts kept circling back to the same questions. When had everything started to feel so fragile? When had love turned into distance? In the afternoon, she passed Ethan's room again. The door was open this time. Inside, his laptop sat closed on the desk. The guitar leaned against the wall. On the bed lay a stack of old notebooks, pages worn and folded. Claire didn't go in. She didn't need to. She already knew what was inside them stories. Lyrics, dreams Ethan once believed in fully. She wondered when Mark had stopped believing. That evening, Mark didn't come home for dinner. Claire ate alone. Ethan didn't join her either. She heard him moving around his room, restless. The house felt like it was holding its breath. When Mark finally came home, it was past midnight. Claire was still awake. She heard his phone buzz as he walked through the hallway. He stopped walking. Claire sat up in bed. Mark looked at the screen, his face tightening for just a moment before he noticed Claire watching. He turned the phone over quickly. "Who was that?" she asked. "Just work," he said, too fast. She didn't push. She didn't have the strength for another empty answer. The next morning, Mark left his phone on the kitchen counter when he went to shower. It buzzed once. Then again, Claire tried to ignore it. She really did. But when the name lit up the screen, her breath caught. Lena, she had heard that name before. Mark had mentioned her months ago, casually, as someone from work. At the time, Claire hadn't thought much of it. Now, she picked up the phone. The messages weren't graphic. They didn't need to be. They spoke of missing each other, of late nights, of understanding, of feelings that should not have existed. Claire's hands shook as she put the phone down. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring at the counter as if the world had shifted slightly to the side. Down the hall, Ethan's door opened. He walked out slowly, his eyes tired again. "Are you okay?" he asked. Claire looked at him and saw something painful and familiar in his face. The look of someone who sensed the truth even before hearing it. "I don't know," she said honestly. Ethan nodded, as if he understood more than she had said. He went back into his room and closed the door gently. Claire stood alone in the kitchen, the sound of the shower running, the phone silent now. She thought of Ethan, trying to hold on to who he used to be. She thought of Mark, slipping away piece by piece. And she thought of herself standing still while everything else moved. For the first time, she admitted what she had been avoiding. Something had already broken. And soon, someone would have to face it. The morning sunlight poured into the kitchen, catching the edges of the countertops, the coffee mug still half full from Claire's restless night. Ethan sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a cup, staring into it as if it could answer the questions in his mind. Claire moved around, making herself busy with breakfast, trying to keep her own thoughts from spinning out of control. She watched him quietly, noticing the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking. The way his eyes seemed distant, carrying burdens too heavy for someone his age. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, placing a plate of toast in front of him. Ethan looked up quickly, almost startled. He nodded, but his eyes betrayed him. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Claire had learned to read him well. She could see the uncertainty lingering behind the words. He was trying to find solid ground, trying to anchor himself to something familiar. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the growing gap she felt between them, but she hesitated. She had learned over the years that sometimes the only way to understand someone was to watch them quietly, without forcing answers. She poured herself a second cup of coffee and sat across from him, letting the silence fill the space between them, heavy but necessary. Mark's presence was absent, but his shadow seemed to linger in the house. Claire could feel it in the quiet hallway, in the untouched dinner plates, in the way Ethan's laughter had grown quieter over the months. She knew that something was slipping, and every small sign of it chipped away at her sense of stability. She didn't need to see Mark to know he was pulling away, seeking solace somewhere else. She just needed the proof. Later, while organizing some papers in the living room, Claire noticed Mark's phone left unattended on the counter. Her curiosity battled with her sense of caution. She didn't want to invade his privacy, but the nagging feeling she had carried for months demanded answers. The phone buzzed, and the name that appeared on the screen froze her in place. Lena, her heart skipped a beat. She had heard the name before in passing months ago when Mark mentioned. A coworker at the time, it had meant nothing. No, it spoke volumes. She picked up the phone cautiously, scrolling through messages that were casual at first, then growing warmer, more intimate. Words that should have stayed between coworkers now carried feelings that belonged elsewhere, feelings she had never imagined hearing from her husband. Claire felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that always accompanied betrayal. It was quiet but relentless, a slow burn that left her breathless. She didn't cry, she didn't shout. She simply stood there staring at the messages, each word twisting like a knife. She didn't want, but couldn't avoid. The sound of Ethan's footsteps pulled her attention back. He emerged from his room carrying his guitar. His hair was tousled, his expression tentative, almost fearful. Claire realized he had been awake too, perhaps sensing the tension, perhaps struggling with his own thoughts. He set the guitar down gently and looked at her, searching for reassurance. "I'm okay," she said softly, though she wasn't. She didn't know if anyone would believe her. Not Ethan, not Mark, not even herself. But she needed to speak something to fill the silence that threatened to swallow them all. Ethan nodded and went back to his room. The door closed quietly behind him, leaving Claire alone in the kitchen. The house felt vast now, empty in ways it hadn't before, as if every room carried a memory too heavy to hold. She ran her hands over the counter, grounding herself, trying to steady the storm inside. By evening, the house was quiet again. Mark hadn't returned yet. Claire paced, her mind racing through the day's events, the messages she had read, the way Ethan had looked at her, the way the house seemed to shrink and expand with each passing thought. She realized that silence wasn't empty. It was full of tension, full of questions that demanded answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Finally, Mark arrived, his presence filling the hallway with the familiar sound of keys and footsteps. Claire waited, her back to the wall, her hands clenched. He didn't notice her immediately, preoccupied with his coat and his own thoughts. When he finally looked at her, there was a hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of something she couldn't name. "Dinner's ready," she said, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. Mark nodded, sitting at the table. He glanced at her phone, on the counter, knowing she had seen it. He didn't say anything. The unspoken words filled the room, thick and heavy, each second stretching longer than the last dot. Ethan emerged from his room again, carrying a notebook this time. He flipped through pages filled with lyrics, sketches, and fragments of thoughts. Claire watched him, noticing the determination in his movements, the way he tried to reclaim something he had lost. His eyes met hers for a moment, and she saw both vulnerability and courage. He was searching for himself just as much as she was searching for Mark. The evening passed in a haze of quiet movements, unspoken feelings, and tentative glances. Claire couldn't shake the thought that something fundamental had changed. Mark's distance was no longer a temporary absence. It was a presence of its own, shaping the house, shaping Ethan, shaping her own heart. Later, when the house was dark except for the soft glow of Ethan's desk lamp, Claire stood in the hallway, looking at his door. She heard the gentle strum of the guitar, the low hum of a melody that spoke of longing, loss, and hope all at once. Ethan played with care, each note deliberate, each pause meaningful. Claire realized then that both her husband and her stepson were searching for something different things, but both elusive. Ethan sought himself, Mark sought escape, and she sought clarity. She had always believed in the strength of family, in the bonds they had built over the years. But now those bonds felt fragile, stretched thin by secrets, desires, and unspoken truths. Her hands shook slightly as she leaned against the wall, letting the sound of the guitar wash over her. It was honest and pure, a stark contrast to the lies and half-truths that had filled the rest of the house. Claire understood that the next conversation would change everything. There was no turning back. She thought of the years she had invested in this family, the sacrifices, the love, the small victories that had seemed monumental at the time. And now all of it felt uncertain, teetering on the edge of something irreparable. She had to confront Mark, but she also had to protect Ethan, to help him find his voice again, to ensure he didn't carry the weight of adult mistakes he had. No part in. The strumming stopped, leaving a silence that felt heavier than any words could. Claire closed her eyes, letting herself breathe, feeling the tension settle into her bones. The house was quiet, but it was a quiet that demanded action. She walked slowly back to the kitchen, picked up the phone again, and read the messages one more time. Lena's words were casual, intimate, and persistent, revealing the depth of Mark's distraction, his emotional departure. Claire felt a mixture of sorrow and resolve. She knew that ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. She needed to speak, to confront, to understand, and maybe to heal. Down the hall, Ethan opened his door again. He looked at her, and she saw the fear and hope mirrored in his eyes. He had sensed the tension, had felt the shifts in the house, the changes in Mark, the quiet weight of her emotions. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His presence was enough. Claire took a deep breath. She felt the weight of what she was about to do, the consequences of confronting the truth. But she also felt a flicker of courage, a quiet fire that had been dormant for too long. She could no longer be passive in her own life. She picked up the phone, took one last glance at Ethan, and then walked down the hallway toward Mark's room. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet with each step she felt a sense of purpose. The door was slightly ajar. She paused for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, the distant sound of cars, the faint whisper of the wind against the window. She knew that once she stepped inside, nothing would be the same. Claire pushed the door open gently, her heart pounding. Mark looked up, startled, his phone still in his hand. There was a brief pause, a moment of suspended reality where neither spoke, where both understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Claire's voice was steady, calm, but carried the weight of every sleepless night, every quiet heartbreak, every fear she had held back. "We need to talk," she said simply. Mark swallowed, his eyes shifting away, then back. He nodded slightly, a silent admission that the conversation was inevitable. Down the hall, Ethan played his guitar softly again, as if offering a fragile soundtrack to the confrontation that would decide the future of the family, the boundaries of love and the limits of forgiveness. Claire stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her. She knew the words she was about to speak would be raw, emotional, and unavoidable. And deep down, she also knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. The house held its breath, and the night waited for the story to unfold.